Thank you for the kind introduction, Mr. Chair. Now, in this presentation, I'm going to try and give an overview of the impact of climate change on plant and soil health. And this is obviously quite a broad topic, but hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll have some idea of the huge dangers that climate change poses for food security on this planet. Now, we all have heard of the effects of climate change on agriculture, and this slide just shows some of them. The more important ones: the loss of biodiversity in fragile environments, the loss of coastal lands caused by rising sea level, unpredictable farming conditions, and then what we have experienced personally are the droughts. Some of us have even experienced other weather extremes, huge storms, floods, hurricanes, etc. But the one which is relevant to today's talk is the increase in the incidence of pests and vector-borne diseases, as far as that is going to influence food security. On the flip side, we don't realize that food production or agriculture also has capital degradation in terms of it results in biodiversity loss, in soil erosion, desertification, water waste, water depletion, water pollution, air pollution, and obviously also negative impacts on human health. In terms of agriculture, forestry, and the change that this has on land uses, these changes account for 25% of human-induced greenhouse gas emissions in terms of carbon dioxide. Agriculture is also one of the main sources of emitted methane and nitrous oxide, which is also a greenhouse gas, which also contributes to climate change. Here we can see what has happened since 1960 in Australia in terms of changes in the mean annual temperature. We can see that in 2019, last year, Australia was quite a different place to what it was in 1960 in terms of the mean annual temperature increase. Now, this book is probably one of the most important books that has been written in the last 20 years. It deals with how societies choose to fail or survive because of what they do to their environments. Environmental problems that have contributed to the collapse of past societies have included things like deforestation, soil erosion, water management, overhunting, etc., etc. Problems that will contribute to the weakening and collapse of present and future societies will be, most prominently, anthropogenic climate change. So, climate change, what does it mean? Well, firstly, we need to understand the complexity that climate change poses if we are to deal with it. There are many biotic and abiotic interactions in crop systems that are extremely complex and that vary in time and space. So whenever a problem arrives in a cropping system, we are inclined to either say it's a fungus, it's related to the soil, it's bacterial, it's climate change, it's a virus. But what we really need to realize is that it's actually a system, and that a system is extremely complex, and that until we understand the system, we will not be able to deal with climate change. So these systems, what are they? Well, this is a system. This is typical of an agro-ecosystem, a very complex ecological system. It is a spatially and functionally coherent unit of agricultural activity which includes the living and non-living components involved in that agricultural unit, as well as all their interactions. So what is the difference then between a natural ecosystem and an agro-ecosystem? Well, here we can see that natural ecosystems vary in terms of the complexity and the importance of plant species, biotic interactions, where the size of the arrow reflects the impact agricultural practices, in other words, have very little impact on natural ecosystems as opposed to agroecosystems. Plant diversity is very important in natural ecosystems, much less in agroecosystems where we are inclined to get into monocropping. So to compound this, conventional agricultural practices such as tillage, organic and inorganic amendments, pesticides, etc., have powerful influences on the biotic or the living interactions that influence crop and food production. Climate change is a very complex thing, as I've mentioned, but what exactly is it? Well, if we need to evaluate the effects of climate change effectively, we should consider the entire agroecosystem, and we should recognize the multiple factors and role players, each of which may be affected differently by different climatic variables. So in this context, we can say then that conventional agriculture operates in a paradigm of ignorance, because there is very little understanding of the ecological processes or the interactions that occur in an agroecosystem, especially those that occur below ground, to say nothing of those that occur above ground. Here we have an agroecosystem. We have a field of maize and sunflower with some intercropping. Below ground, we have what comprises probably more complexity. Above ground, we have a lot of biodiversity, but it's planned and managed by farmers. Below ground, the biodiversity is unplanned and unmanaged. And these processes below ground, these interactions, are out of sight to most of us. Most farmers don't know anything about what happens below ground, and therefore out of mind. So they are inclined to be ignored, hence the ignorance. Crucial to this understanding is the soil-food web and the passing of energy from the sun through plants to microbes and to higher forms of life, eventually to animals such as us, through what are termed trophic levels. This is the framework against which we understand the life in soil. Now we need to realize that soil is actually alive. In 1 gram of soil, we can have more than 100 million bacterial cells, more than 11,000 species of bacteria, including many species of fungi and all the microfauna that you saw on the slide. Soil biological communities, or soil biota, have a decisive influence on the delivery of ecosystem services. Ecosystem services, what are they? Well, here we see some of the ecosystem services that are crucial to us and to our survival and to our ability to grow food and to produce the things that we need as human beings. But what is more important here is that the functional assemblages of decomposers, nutrient transformers, ecosystem engineers, all the little microbes have very important impact on carbon transformation, on nutrient cycling, soil structure maintenance, and on the regulation of biological populations, which in turn will impact on the soil-based delivery processes such as these, which in turn will impact on how we produce agricultural goods and how non-agricultural services are rendered. So the economic benefits of these soil biota are quite staggering, as we can see here. In terms of the ecosystem services on the left here, we can see that the organisms which are involved contribute on an annual scale an enormous amount to the global economy. This is given in US dollars, billions of US dollars, 760 billion US dollars in terms of waste recycling. Soil formation, 25 billion US dollars, to give a staggering total of 1,542 billion US dollars annually. The total estimated economic benefits of these microorganisms A staggering figure, I'm sure you'll agree. So we need to take a few, some terminology into consideration. And one of the terms which most of you will know is that of conservation agriculture, which really is an approach to managing agroecosystems for improved and sustained productivity, increased profits and food security, while preserving and enhancing the resource base and environments. Conservation agriculture is the integration of ecological management with modern scientific agricultural production. It represents a holistic embrace of the knowledge that can ensure sustainability. So the major strength of conservation agriculture is the implementation of soil husbandry practices that build to a much cheaper and more robust and more productive environmentally friendly farming system. Agroecosystems are therefore more sustainable than conventional agricultural systems because of the focus of producing crops with healthy soils. Another term which has come into circulation recently is that of regenerative agriculture, or RA. It's a buzzword which was created by Professor Buzz Clute from the University of South Carolina. It is similar to conservation agriculture in that it combines the use of stubble retention, crop rotation, and the minimum disturbance of the soil to also promote soil health, but on a higher level. So you will notice that soil health is crucial to this approach of ecological farming. RA also incorporates the use of cover crops, compost teas, compost manure, pesticides, and genetically modified organisms, all in an integrated approach. Now, as I mentioned earlier, agroecology is essentially the study of systems. It's systems which consist of biomes. Biomes are site-specific environments, and these biomes are many and varied, created by the micro and the macroorganisms that inhabit them, the plants, and various arthropods, animals, and other things. But over and above all of this is the effect that climate will have on these biomes. So these biomes are very similar to the microbiome that we have in our body, the bacteria that comprise us. The human microbiome represents a population of more than 100 trillion microorganisms that colonize our stomach, our mouth, our skin, and the rest of our body. More cells are composed of bacteria than are actually composed of flesh or organs. And this book, written by Martin Blazer, describes how, because of our lifestyles of using antibiotics, etc., many of the crucial microbes are missing, leading to all sorts of modern diseases such as Parkinson's, diabetes, etc. So microbiomes are all basically put into one cluster termed a phytobiome, phyto meaning plant. So phytobiomes represent plants, their physical environment, and associated communities of organisms. These little microbiomes are actually worlds within worlds. And they are actually a collective set of genes or genomes that exist within a particular ecological niche, be that on a leaf of a plant, either the phyllosphere or the drylosphere, in other words, the little tunnels that earthworms make, the pores in soil, the detritus, the aggregates. But the most important microbiome is the rhizosphere microbiome or the rhizobiome. This is one of the most important biomes on the planet, as you will see as later on as we progress. The rhizobiome has an enormous density of prokaryotes, reaching densities much greater than the total number of associated plant cells, much like in our bodies. 1 trillion plant cells can occur in the rhizobiome. More than 30,000 bacterial species per gram of root. Bacteria in the rhizobiome can adapt rapidly according to changing environmental conditions, especially climatic variables. And this adaptation is what is going to determine the success or not of crop production. So if we look at the structural diversity in the rhizobiome, we see that the genes in a plant are outnumbered by the number of genes in the organisms that are associated with that plant. So the collective genome of the rhizosphere microbiome is much larger than the genome which we refer to as the plant's second genome. We can see here almost twice the number of genes in the rhizobiome than in the plant itself. There's also a lot of functional diversity in the rhizobiome, representing physiology, tolerance to abiotic stress, nutrient acquisition, etc., etc. Bad things are the diseases, the pathogens, and then there are also the things that we can associate with in terms of food contamination. So what's important to realize is that the interactions within phytobiomes affect soil and plant health, which impact on soil fertility, crop yield, and food quality. And most important are the microbes. They are crucial, as we have seen thus far. Soils play a crucial role. And then finally, to complete the triangle, plants. Over and above this, we have lots of other data in terms of weather data, the animals, farm data, and nutrients which comprise the phytobiome. Now, what's important to realize is that root exudates drive the interactions in the phytobiome. Between 20 and 50% of carbon, which is fixed by photosynthesis, is released as root exudates. And these exudates feed the rhizosphere microbiome. They feed the interactions between plants and microbes, between microbes and microbes, etc., etc. And these interactions can have both positive and negative effects on the soil food web that I spoke about earlier on. So just to give you an example of how varied and how many different kinds of plant root exudates there are. Amino acids, organic acids, sugars. Nobody would ever have guessed that there's so much variation in what comes out of a plant root. Now these plant root exudates, which basically feed the rhizobiome, are drivers of plant and soil health. There are environmental factors that influence them, both living, biotic factors, and abiotic factors. And then there are plant microorganism interactions, which also play a crucial role. Now, these interactions, specifically the positive ones, which are brought about by rhizobacteria, which promote plant growth, can contribute to the biocontrol of pathogens, phytohormones, the availability of micronutrients, etc. And we can use them to produce biofungicides or biofertilizers. So we could call these microbial crop partners. Crop partners, or microbes, that unlock soil-bound nutrients, protect against pathogens, stimulate the development of the plant, that fix atmospheric nitrogen, such as the rhizobia, and that can enhance the access to nutrients, such as phosphorus and nitrogen. Now, in terms of climate change and its effect on rhizodeposition, the levels of carbon dioxide that will increase are going to result in higher biomass and a higher level of rhizodeposition of carbon, more sugars, which can increase the microbial biomass and activity in the short term. But in the long term, it can release or result in huge imbalances. So these rhizo deposits are very, very important in terms of how they feed back through carbon dioxide and through things like temperature and other extreme climatic events to exacerbate climate change. The interaction between the living and the non-living variables we see here in terms of the biological variables and the climatic variables also feed back. So the impact of carbon dioxide and increased temperature will result in responses of plant and animal communities, in responses to the soil geochemistry, which will result in these microbes adapting, and feedback responses again to the environment. Microbes can adapt to climatic variables by adjusting their activity rates, their biomass, and the community structure. And these adaptations can have huge impact on what happens in the soil. So climate change is intimately linked then to soil health. We can see that in terms of the biological soil health indicators, the chemical soil health indicators, and the physical soil health indicators, there are many processes that will be influenced. Temperature will increase, soil organic matter will decrease because of climate change. Nitrogen mineralization will increase. Carbon dioxide will increase. The carbon-nitrogen ratio increase. The rate of decomposition and nutrient availability will, however, decrease. pH will decrease. Soils will become more acidic, and microbial diversity, most importantly, will also decrease. So phytobiomes are intimately linked in to climate processes, and they can alter the intrinsic properties of plants that underlie the mechanisms by which vegetation influences weather and climate. And it's crucial that we understand the extent to which phytobiomes can impact climate and weather, and the potential consequences for plant health and thus crop production, because these processes will possibly exacerbate or modulate climate change. So on a more practical level then, how can we achieve sustainable crop production? Well, there are three strategies that are crucial: crop-related, soil-related, and water-related strategies. The question, however, that remains is, how do these strategies overlap, and what do we do where the overlap of these strategies is relevant to climate change? Well, just briefly, some of the crop-related strategies, the options that we have: we can improve water use, we can improve transpiration efficiency of crops, the harvest index, and we can also reduce pest, weeds, and diseases. The predicted results of climate change will be increases in temperature, increases in moisture, and increases in carbon dioxide levels, the most important ones. Each one of these can impact on pathogens, on the environment, and on crops in terms of many more variables than the ones shown here, and not just inoculum or virulence or genetic susceptibility or health or leaf wetness and temperature. There's a whole load of characteristics inherent to each one of these three entities. So the soil-related strategies essentially revolve around tillage practices. And we know that minimum tillage increases water storage, reduces water loss, it will reduce wind erosion, improve crop yields by up to 120%, etc., etc. Tillage is intimately linked to soil health. Tillage oxygenates the soil. It provides air for the microbes which burn carbon. In other words, it stimulates microbial respiration. It reduces organic matter in doing this, much like feeding a stove, a wood-burning stove with air, opening the vents. The wood will burn much faster. So by increasing tillage, we are going to result in the escape of CO2, the smoke, so to speak, of the stove. And this will be accompanied by declining organic matter. In other words, the wood that is burning. So there will be less food for the soil organisms. This will result in unhealthy microbial and faunal communities, reduced aggregation of soil particles, which will result in poor drainage, compaction, and so on. The downward spiral of poor soil health will continue until we are left with some of the most negative things we can imagine. Soil carbon. is intimately linked to climate change in terms of the interaction between moisture and temperature. And here we can see that in hot, dry areas, soil carbon sequestration is lowest. These areas are areas such as our own country, where we have very low carbon sequestration, and which will be exacerbated by climate change in the next decades. Soil organisms, we've seen, are involved in nearly every aspect of soil quality and nutrient cycling, in aggregation, in the production of organic matter, decomposition, nutrient cycling, nitrate leaching, and humification. So the soil microbial community is absolutely crucial to the impact that climate change will have on plant health. Soil temperature is also very important, therefore, and the effect that it will have on soil quality. Here we can see that the soil processes of crusting, compaction, runoff, etc. are all increased by increasing soil temperature. Soil quality, such as soil structure, available water capacity, soil organic compounds, and the infiltration rate, all decreased by increasing soil temperatures. So what we eventually end up with is this, a conventionally tilled field where we basically have surface crust impeding infiltration of water, compared to this no-till field where we have little tunnels where the water can infiltrate, we have an open granular structure, good aggregation, etc. Here we have a field photograph I took in 2015 in the Free State that is tilled compared to a field that isn't tilled. Most of the sand was blown away by the end of the summer. Another strategy of the three I alluded to earlier is a water-related strategies in terms of rain-fed agriculture. We need to develop technologies to harvest rain and to conserve soil moisture. And we need to find ways to prevent waterlogging, erosion, and leaching. There are a number of rainwater management strategies, such as the ones we can see here, which will increase plant water availability and also increase plant water uptake capacity. And all of these involve various things that we can do to improve our rainwater management. One of the important things related to water is obviously pH, which I mentioned earlier, decreases. This is usually induced by injudicious fertilization practices, the leaching of nitrates, and the uptake of alkalinity from soil into harvested plants. The impact of this is that it reduces plant growth, decreases the availability of nutrients, increases the impact of toxic elements, restricts soil biological activity, which is most important, and then will finally lead to soil structure decline, erosion, and salinity. So the question I asked earlier, what lies in the middle of these strategies? Well, essentially strategies that recognize the phytobiome, that recognize the complexity of the phytobiome, and that adapt these strategies accordingly. So one of them is obviously ecological farming, sustainable ecological farming, whereby we have more high-yield polyculture, more organic fertilizers, more biological pest control, and all the good practices we see here, and a lot less of these bad practices or bad manifestation of conventional agriculture. So, to conclude, this slide summarizes most of what I've said in the foregoing slides in terms of how phytobiomes affect plant and soil health. We can see that there are negative interactions and positive interactions, and that these negative interactions in terms of the root exudates can increase plant pathogens and inhibit plant beneficial microbes. They can also damage plants through infection or the production of toxins, where the positive interactions can have a lot more beneficial effects by inhibiting the pathogens, inducing systemic resistance, and essentially all is driven in this area of the soil, the rhizosphere microbiome. So to summarize then, the phytobiome, especially the rhizosphere microbiome, is an important bioindicator of edaphic factors such as soil temperature, soil moisture, and soil pH, and will obviously play a crucial role in plant and soil health. Climate change drivers will create abiotic stresses which are going to influence carbon and nitrogen cycling in agroecosystems. Plants and their phytobiomes can respond either positively or negatively to the influence of these climate stresses, occurring either individually or in combination. The phytobiomes will alter the properties of vegetation or crops, and these underlying mechanisms will in turn influence weather and climate, the feedbacks that I alluded to earlier on. So, what are our options? Well, the use of novel technologies to study these phytobiomes at appropriate temporal and spatial scales is pivotal to revealing microbiomes that can lead to shifts in plant and soil health. We need to learn how to manipulate what is underground, in other words, putting it plain and simply. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen.